A special thank you to each of our subscribers who make this channel possible. Here's today's story. On December 4th, 2025, Russian President Vladimir Putin was warmly received by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Palam Air Base in New Delhi, marking the beginning of his visit to India. This visit is significant as it is Putin's first since the 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which led to a slew of international sanctions. During a joint address with Prime Minister Modi, Putin emphasized Russia's commitment to ensuring a steady supply of fuel to India. This declaration comes amid ongoing pressure from the United States urging India to cease its imports of Russian oil. Facing sanctions that have cut off traditional markets, Russia has turned to nations like India to sustain its export levels. India, now the second largest purchaser of Russian crude oil after China, accounted for 38% of Russian crude exports in October, according to the Finland-based Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. In a move to curb the purchase of Russian oil, former U.S. President Donald Trump imposed sanctions on two major Russian oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, in October. This followed a 25% tariff imposed on India in August for its continued import of Russian oil. Nonetheless, India finds itself in a delicate balancing act, as it maintains strong diplomatic ties with the U.S. while heavily depending on Russia for both energy supplies and military equipment. The sanctions forced Russia to seek new customers for its exports. India has become the second biggest buyer of Russian crude oil, after China, with a report Finland-based Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air showing India bought 38% of Russian crude exports in October. In October, President Donald Trump sanctioned two of Russia's largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. This followed a tariff of 25% on India for buying Russian oil in August. But India has to walk a tightrope because it has close ties to the U.S. while also relying on Russia for fuel and access to military hardware. Putin questioned U.S. pressure on India in an interview to an Indian television channel on Thursday. The United States still buys nuclear fuel from Russia for its own nuclear power plants, Putin said in the interview, adding, "If the U.S. has the right to buy our fuel, why shouldn't India have the same privilege?" While Trump has acknowledged that India has cut back its Russian oil imports, experts told CNBC that this may be a temporary trend. Apart from crude oil, Russia's Rosatom is also delivering reactors and reportedly fuel for India's Kudankulam nuclear power plant in Tamil Nadu, which has a combined capacity of 6,000 megawatts. India and Russia have an energy partnership, the Russian president said, adding that Moscow had been a reliable supplier of oil, gas, coal, and everything that is required for the development of India's energy. Last month, India announced a historic deal with Washington, in which Indian state-owned oil companies signed a one-year deal to import around 2.2 million tons per annum of liquefied petroleum gas from the U.S. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said Moscow is ready to provide uninterrupted shipments of fuel to India, as Delhi faces pressure from the U.S. to stop buying Russian oil. Putin, speaking alongside Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Delhi, questioned earlier why India should be punished for buying oil when the U.S. itself buys nuclear fuel from Moscow. President Donald Trump has imposed 50% tariffs on most Indian products, arguing that Delhi's continued purchases of Russian oil helped fund the war in Ukraine, an accusation India denies. Putin's visit comes as the U.S. holds a series of talks with Russia and Ukraine in an attempt to broker a peace deal to end the war. On Thursday, Putin told India Today that Russia was working on a peaceful solution to ending the war, warning that Ukraine must withdraw from the Donbass or Russia would seize it. Either we liberate these territories by force, or Ukrainian troops will leave these territories, he said. Modi repeated India's stance that it was not neutral on the war in Ukraine and stood on the side of peace, welcoming efforts to find a lasting solution to end the war. He highlighted that increasing the connectivity of Russia and India was a major priority for India. In recent months, India-US ties have hit an all-time low as the two countries have failed to resolve the tariff deadlock. Trump initially imposed a 25% tariff on India, but announced an additional 25% later as a penalty for Delhi's purchase of Russian oil, a move the Indian government called unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable at the time. In his interview with India Today, Putin commented on the U.S. tariffs on India for buying Russian oil and said that India should have the same opportunities available as the U.S. The United States itself still buys nuclear fuel from us for its own nuclear power plants. If the U.S. has the right to buy our fuel, why shouldn't India have the same privilege? He asked. Russia remained the U.S. top supplier of nuclear reactor fuel last year, Bloomberg reported in September, citing data from the Department of Energy. A ban on enriched uranium imports from the country was enshrined into law in May. The two leaders exchanged memorandums during Friday's briefing, outlining mutual objectives in areas including trade and agriculture. Modi announced two new 30-day visa schemes for Russian tourists visiting India and said that two new Indian consulates had opened in Russia. Russia Today, a Kremlin-funded, state-controlled TV network, would also be launched in India, the Prime Minister said. No major defense deals were announced, but the two men said there were agreements signed on shipbuilding, investments in civil nuclear energy, and critical minerals. India and Russia also agreed on an economic program valid until 2030, the leaders said, spanning jobs, shipping, and the health industry. Putin said he was confident about increasing current bilateral trade from $60 billion to $100 billion in the coming years. Modi said that energy security has been a strong and important pillar of the India-Russia partnership, but made no specific reference to oil. India, the world's third-largest consumer of crude oil, has been buying large volumes from Russia since the Kremlin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. But some Indian firms have already started reducing oil imports from Russia to comply with U.S. sanctions. Putin also referenced a flagship project, building India's largest nuclear power plant, that he said Moscow would help with. In a joint statement released after their meeting, the leaders said their partnership was being reoriented toward joint research and development, as well as the production of advanced defense platforms. Putin added that he and Modi were cooperating on foreign policy, with their coalition of BRICS countries promoting a more just and multipolar world. BRICS is an informal alliance of several major developing countries, including India, Russia, China, Brazil, and South Africa, which formed in 2006, broadly to challenge the political and economic power of North America and Western European nations. That's all for this story. We upload videos every day covering many different subjects, so hit that subscribe button to stay informed. Thanks for watching.